Ukraine's biggest recent victories have been decimating Russia's Black Sea fleet. But can the war at sea turn the tide of the conflict? This is World at War. I'm the Sun's defence editor, Jerome Starkey, and joining me today is Admiral the Lord West, former First Sea Lord and Security and Cyber Minister. Lord West, you're no stranger to conflict at sea, a Falklands War veteran. You led the Royal Navy. Can you first of all just tell us, how significant have Ukraine's victories in the Black Sea been for its defence against Russia?
I think they've been extremely significant, and they've impacted on Putin because he has a soft spot for his navy, and he's furious that he thinks his navy is doing so badly. Basically, they've constrained the ability for the Russians to have freedom of action within the Black Sea, and that is very impressive, bearing in mind their limited capability that they have. They've been brilliant about using maritime-type drones and vessels. We've actually given them a huge amount of advice on this, and we've been giving their maritime a lot of advice for many years. I can remember doing this well before the war, out in Ukraine on a visiting their staff colleges where we had people instructing them on the naval side of things. The Russians were a bit slapdash. They didn't have a proper way of looking after their shipping. They didn't take the risk too seriously. That's why the Moskva was sunk. That was very poor. That should never have happened. The loss of Snake Island, if you remember earlier in the war, how they captured it, how they lost that. Again, the Russians have not been clever in how they've responded in thinking about this. And they've withdrawn and withdrawn. The other thing is long-range missile attacks against ships when they're alongside in harbour. The Ukrainians have got very good at that, and of course severe damage to landing craft, a submarine, and so the Russians have withdrawn across to Novorossiysk really effectively, as I said, have lost the ability to operate freely. That has allowed the Ukrainians to do things like clear minefields and allow what is so important for them, the export of grain down through the Bosphorus, which of course brings income into Ukraine.
It looks really spectacular. We've seen the footage of Storm Shadow cruise missiles hitting the Black Sea Fleet, the headquarters of the Black Sea Fleet in Sebastopol. We've seen the aftermath photographs, as you mentioned, of that Kilo-class submarine and landing ships in the dry dock that were hit. And of course, perhaps most dramatic of all, the point-of-view cameras on board those Mogura 4 and the Sea Baby drones that Ukraine's intelligence service is using to sneak up to these warships and crash into their sides. But is it going to make a difference in terms of the bigger picture of the conflict? Despite all of that, we still see Russia advancing, most recently in Kharkiv and before that in Avdiivka and the Donbass. Russia seems to be able to, Lord West, absorb huge levels of human casualties and yet keep grinding on. Is the sea campaign going to make a difference?
The answer is that the sea campaign is not a game changer. It's in a sense, it sounds awful to say it, in a sense it's a sideshow because this is very much a land campaign and, a land campaign in Europe. And so this won't make a change of that. And there's no doubt, Putin doesn't care about the loss of his people. The latest estimates by our intelligence people are that 450,000 Russians have either been killed or injured. There's the military fighting in this war. That is pretty horrifying numbers. There's no doubt initially the Russian army was as incompetent as their navy is, and it was absolute shambles. But the Russians learn, and they have learned. You can see they've done that, and they've built this huge defensive arc in the Donbass, which basically the Ukrainian offensive last year just blunted itself against without achieving anything really. And they are now, as you rightly say, making advances not least because China has has in the last year decided we're going to come in and support them because we feel this is a tilt time in history where things can change. And they have been supporting Russia economically, taking a huge amount of their exports and things, so their economy in Russia is okay. They've been putting a lot of dual-use equipments across, which can be used in missiles and weaponry, and that's why the Russians are at the moment on this bit of a roll. And the Ukrainians, who have taken lots of casualties, not as many as the Russians, but they have, had that lacuna where they weren't being given more advanced Western weapons, which are now coming in. But I fear that I really cannot see how the Ukrainians can defeat Russia. So it depends how you define a victory.
If you were advising Kyiv, if you were advising President Zelensky or General Syrskyi, their military commander, what would you be saying to them? What do they need to try and do to reverse the Russian advances?
Well, I think getting the new weapon, I mean, basically, that's what I would do. I would say, right, your priority now, or our priority now, is to blunt this Russian attack, make it far too expensive for them, knock them back where they've come in, take advantage of where they've overextended themselves, and do exactly that. But I don't think we're in a position to actually attack and change the status within the Donbass. I just don't think, I'm talking as Ukrainian now, we are able to do that. Now, that makes life very, very difficult, because Putin at the moment thinks he's on a roll. We need to stop him think he's on a roll. But I think realistically, this is not the UK government line, I hasten to add, and a number of people think differently. I really do think there's got to be some consideration. How can we stop fighting going on? How can we do this? The trouble is, you have to say, what do each side see as a win? And Ukraine at the moment says they want all their territory back. I can't believe that Putin would ever accept not a ceasefire, an agreement, a peace accord, which gave back Crimea, for example, or even the Donbass. So, it is very difficult to get an agreement between. But I don't think the Ukrainians have got the ability of defeating the Russian army. And as long as they're getting all the weapons from us, I don't think the Russians have got the ability to take over the Ukraine. So it is a bit of a stalemate.
Lord West, last week on this show, General Richard Barron's described Russia as an energy company that's fighting war. So we should think of it as an energy company. I wonder, I know we've discussed this before, whether you think it's in the West's gift or Ukraine's allies' gift to try and make Russia hurt economically, because are the sanctions working at the moment? Well,
I mean, I don't think the sanctions are working as well as they should. And as part of the problem, of course, is that China are now willing to break it, and also I have to say India have been a bit naughty. But one of the areas that, in fact, I'm going to raise it today in the House, is the whole issue of oil exports. And their oil exports from Russia have gone up. And if you look around the world, there are masses, thousands of tankers that are full of Russian oil, exporting oil that should not be exported. And indeed, there are sanctions saying it shouldn't be. And I think we've got to really lever down on those very strongly. I also think we need to tighten up some of the secondary sanctions, because those are the things that China is frightened of. China basically produces something like 45% of all the produced stuff in the world. They make 45% of it, and they use less than a tenth of it. That imbalance, they've got to sell what they're doing. And if the secondary sanctions are biting, and Xi Jinping knows this, that's why he's not been all-out support for Russia. That's why he's not giving them weapons, although he's giving them dual use. That's a way of making sure he walks back a bit. And if China walked back from Russia, then I think they would find it very difficult. I have to say, Putin and his agreements and cuddling Xi Jinping, he looks like the little teddy bear about to be eaten, doesn't he? The danger of supping with the devil. The Chinese love all the raw materials in Siberia, and I think he is very much the supplicant, Putin. And I know a number of people in Russia don't like what's going on, but so there is a risk there for him. But I think that way with the sanctions, we could really put pressure on.
Lord West, thank you. So risks for Russia, but also sounds pretty bleak for Ukraine. Thank you for joining us on World at War. I'm Jerome Starkey, the Sun's defence editor. And if you're watching this on YouTube and you have any questions, then please don't hesitate to ask them in the comments below, and we'll try and answer some of them next week.